Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, in just 2 days, newly selected White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer will travel west to speak at the University of Chicago, one of this nation's most prestigious and expensive colleges. He's coming at the invitation of longtime Obama aide David Axelrod. The topic, of course, is politics and the presidential campaign. But not everyone on campus believes Spicer should be allowed to talk in public. They argue that by inviting a Trump supporter to campus, the school is, quote, normalizing the incoming administration. Some students are threatening to shut down the event entirely. One of those joins us now. He is University of Chicago senior Jake Biddle. He's also an editor of a local weekly paper. Jake, thanks for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
I like your tie. So you wrote on Facebook that you wanted to shut this thing down, and you suggested projectile vomiting during the event, which I assume was a joke. But the idea was that this guy, Sean Spicer, should not be allowed to speak. And I read a lot of what you wrote about it, and one of your explanations was, well, he represents a press operation that is hostile to freedom of speech and to the freedom of the press. Therefore, he shouldn't be allowed to talk. There seems an irony in that. He's against freedom of speech, so you don't let him talk? How does that work?
Sure. So what I was saying was not that he shouldn't be allowed to talk. Rather, what I was saying was that I, as a student, and yes, it was a joke when I said that I was going to projectile vomit on him, although I'm glad that I made it because now I get to explain what I meant to you. So what I meant was that I, as a student, and my peers should be allowed to respond to his presence on my campus in ways that aren't just civil or decorous and don't involve just sort of standing up after the event and asking him a question. Although I never said he should be disinvited, and I never said he shouldn't be allowed to talk.
But in ways that involve force, I mean, it sounds like. I mean, so when you say we should be allowed to respond, how about the traditional path, which is to make a counter case? You disagree with what he stands for, which is, of course, fine. And you say, this is what I stand for, and may the best man win. You don't believe in that, it seems like.
Sure. So Sean Spicer was hired and is paid to have certain opinions and to support certain policies about the press. He has power, a national platform. He's in the news every day, and he has access to policy-making power. If I stand up and ask him a question and say, Sean, have you ever considered that you might be a fascist? He can give me a smarmy answer. It lasts 20 seconds, and I don't get a follow-up. And then what do? I'm saying I would like to raise visibility and voice my frustrations with this person in ways that aren't sort of going to die after 20 seconds, and he gives me, sort of a non-answer. He's a spin doctor.
But that's a stupid question, though. Why are you a fascist? I mean, I'm not even sure we could agree on what that means. How about specific? Like, you believe this, you're in favor of this policy, here's why I think it's wrong or hurts America. Make your case. And in all the social media of yours that I've read today, I haven't seen you doing that. Instead, and you're clearly smart, I've seen you calling names, which seems to be kind of the way people respond now. Would it be better to make a case?
Sure. So, I think that no matter what kind of case I make, and no matter how good of a point I make to him, he has no reason to listen to me and no incentive to listen to me. This isn't about who's right. It's about who has power. And so I think that students in this country need to mobilize in ways that would actually get people that we like in office instead of sort of discussing in sanitized environments and, in moderated conversations. Does that make sense?
It sort of does. And just to help you elucidate it more, I want to put on the screen something that you wrote in your school newspaper. Recently, the independent school newspaper. You said this: now we are faced with a real crisis, this being the election of Trump. We must take real action and dispense with all this sophistry, all these abstract notions of civility, which are just Ivy League translations of the vulgar give Trump a chance. By real action, I mean donating money to the ACLU, to Standing Rock, to Planned Parenthood, calling your representative incessantly, protesting obsessively, flipping cars when Trump walks away from the Paris Climate Agreement, attacking racists you see, attacking people in the supermarket, whatever it takes. So I've got a bunch of questions about this, but the first is, whose cars would you flip?
I don't know yet. It depends on whether or not he walks away from the Paris Climate Accords. I think that if you dwell on the sort of more exaggerated or hyperbolic parts of this article, which is, after all, just an article, you're not going to get a chance to actually ask me what I think political action constitutes. All that this is meant to express, Tucker, is that...
Wait a second. You were just explaining what it... First of all, let me say, having read things you've written going back to, high school, because you've written a lot, you're a pretty articulate person with a precise command of the language, and presumably in an article this long, you could explain exactly what that action, what form it would take. And in this case, you said it takes flipping cars over. And my point is, someone paid for those cars. Like, those aren't your cars. And to destroy other people's property to make your political point isn't really a valid path, is it?
Well, first of all, they flipped cars when the Cubs won. But secondly, Tucker, so I think that Yeah, it's an article, and I exaggerated. But I mean, I'm trying to explain now what I think I actually mean by political action that doesn't consist in sort of sanitized or moderated Q&A sessions or bipartisan roundtables at the Institute of Politics. And I think that you want to say that this way of engaging in politics is sort of a young, petulant thing among closed-minded liberals, but really the sort of ancestry of this kind of action is the Tea Party. I mean, they staged massive demonstrations, they called their representatives incessantly, and they got people that they wanted in office through a grassroots mobilization. I mean, there was big money involved, but frankly, there was a lot of political participation in that. And so I don't think that it's fair to say that what I'm doing is sort of catastrophic or intolerant, when really what I'm trying to argue is that young people need to be politically mobilized in ways that don't just involve talking and asking questions and going back and forth.
And like knowing things. So like, what about the Paris climate agreement do you like so much?
So if America were not to participate in this climate accord, carbon levels would rise so much in the world that it would sort of put us past the point where we can bring it back down in a safe or efficient way.
That suggests you know nothing about it. But let me just ask you this: don't you
Tucker,
think?
Just because I don't have the numbers on it doesn't mean I don't know anything about it.
I'm saying, look, if you're gonna, here's my point: is that you're the editor of a weekly paper. People listen to you, and rather than explain, here's why you ought to support the Paris climate agreement, your position is, if you don't believe everything I think I believe, even if I have no details, then I'm going to flip your car over. I'm going to vomit on you. Do you know what I mean? I'm going to commit an act of violence. I'm going to beat you up in a supermarket. That's not really debate. That's something dumber, no?
Tucker, how could I possibly make the case to the Trump administration that he ought not to walk away from the Paris Climate Accords?
I don't know by knowing what it is. I mean, that might help, but don't you think?
What about how could I possibly make a point in a way that would make him want to listen to me? I mean, it's not about sort of who can make better points, and this guy has a platform. He has control of the country and can do whatever he wants, no matter what he wants. It's not about whether I can convince him and his administration that it's wrong. It's about whether I can make sure that he feels enough pressure that he won't do it and doom the future of our planet.
So what you're articulating isn't politics, it's nihilism. You're saying that none of this matters.
No,
it's
Tucker,
all
that's
kabuki,
absolutely wrong.
And whoever has the gun is the guy in charge. That's basically what you're saying.
Tucker, no, that's exactly what I'm not saying. I'm saying that I have convictions, and I would like to express them on terms that are not set by my opponent. Do you understand what I mean?
Right. Well, I think we can all agree on these terms. Rational, elucidated, facts-based debate carries the day. And if you don't agree with that, and if you think vandalism carries the day, then we can't really have a conversation because we're just starting from places that are so different that it's not even worth it, right?
Right. So you want to say that I won't hear the other side out and I won't participate in a rational debate. But the question is, how could I possibly participate in a rational debate with someone who literally controls the country? I mean, think about this for a second.
No.
Yes,
I'm not
I
sure
agree that
vomiting on him is going to be the answer to that. Well, that might diminish you.
You established this segment by telling me that was a joke, and I agree with you. So I don't know why we're proceeding.
Because I think, look, I'm almost out of time. Let me just say this last thing. I think you're smart. You probably have valid points of view. Maybe I disagree with them. But it might be better to explain what they are rather than start with, hey, if you don't like it, I'm going to hit you in the face, which is where you're starting from.
That's fair, Tucker, but I mean, I think that you've sort of skirted around what my actual point is. And I mean, like, you've read my writings going back to high school. You should know that there's a tradition of hyperbole in writing that goes back, to Juvenal.
No, I got the
Rome.
Hunter Thompson thing. But facts count too. Jake, thanks a lot for joining us. I appreciate it. Well, President-elect Trump is back in New York City after spending Christmas down at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida. Correspondent Peter Ducey is live outside Trump Tower in New York City with how the transition is shaping up. Peter.
Tucker, most offices here in Midtown Manhattan were empty today because it's a federal holiday, but Mr. Trump's up on the 26th floor of his Manhattan skyscraper was not. He was working, and he was tweeting most recently, just a few minutes ago, this: China has been taking out massive amounts of money and wealth from the U.S. in totally one-sided trade, but won't help with North Korea. Nice. And that came just a few minutes after he tweeted about North Korea, too. He said, North Korea just stated that it is in the final stages of developing a nuclear weapon capable of reaching parts of the U.S. It won't happen. Now, he's talked a lot about China and North Korea, not so much about crime in Chicago, which was something else that caught his attention, and he blasted this out a few hours ago. Chicago murder rate is record-setting, 4,331 shooting victims with 761 murders in 2016. If mayor can't do it, he must ask for federal help. Now, something that we have heard the president-elect talk a lot about during the transition is his improbable come-from-behind victory, and he got on the board in 2017 with a pair of tweets about that, too. He said, various media outlets and pundits say that I thought I was going to lose the election. Wrong. It all came together in the last week, and I thought and felt I would win big, easily, over the fabled 270, 306. When they canceled fireworks, they knew, and so did I. Now, today the transition team was also explaining what the president-elect meant on New Year's Eve when he said that on Tuesday or Wednesday of this week, the world is going to be privy to information that he knows but we don't that make him skeptical of Russian government interference with the U.S. election process. Incoming Press Secretary Sean Spicer explained that the president-elect gets regular briefings from his national security team and others, and that is what's been informing his opinion to date.
He is privy to information that nobody else is. But what I think what he is driving at is the fact that there doesn't seem to be conclusive evidence within the intelligence community. There are people who believe certain things, but what we're waiting for is this final report to whether or not it is actually conclusive or whether or not there's just general belief that that's the direction they think this thing is in.
The highest profile visitor here to Trump Tower today was the Vice President-elect Mike Pence. He came and went less than an hour later. It does seem like things are quieting down for the night, but we expect the President-elect to have a full schedule here at Trump Tower tomorrow. Tucker?
Oh, the great Peter Doocy, stuck in New York, not Palm Beach, but it's good to see you anyway. Well, there's just 18 days left in President Obama's term, but he is not wasting a single one of them. He's doing whatever he can to protect his political legacy. You remember that, the one that was soundly rejected by voters in November. Here now to respond is David Goodfriend, an attorney and Democratic strategist who served in the long ago Bill Clinton White House back when the Democratic Party was a very different place. David, it's good to see you.
Thanks for having me on. Happy New Year, Tucker.
Happy New Year to you. So I just have to ask you, I know this is not a probable scenario, but it's being batted around by the lunatics online today. And that is a recess appointment of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. So tomorrow, Congress goes back into session, and the Speaker gavels it out at the end of the 114th. There's a 5-minute intercession between the two, the intercession recess it's called, and then he gavels in the 115th. The idea is that in that period, the president could make a recess appointment of Supreme Court justice. Will he do that?
I don't think so. But I think it's an interesting theory. It suggests that would President Obama exercise every last ounce of executive authority that he has, including doing recess appointments. But I think, by and large, presidents have avoided doing that for Supreme Court justices for good reason. I mean, there is a Senate process for reviewing and consenting on a nominee, and I think that's going to happen here. I will say that I think it was rather pugnacious of the Senate Republicans not to even hold hearings on the president's nominee, which is just part of our constitutional process.
It was pugnacious.
I think they should have had hearings and held a vote and voted against it.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. And yet voters, with that in mind, voted for the Republican anyway and elected him president. And I guess that's the point. So rather than pausing in the aftermath of this kind of amazing election outcome that nobody expected, least of all President Obama, and asking, what are voters trying to tell us? He's moving forward as if the last election ratified his policies and gave him another mandate. So he's done all these things, restricted leasing in the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans, dismantled this tracking system for Muslim visitors to our country, instituted sanctions against Russia, protected 1 million acres of land in the western states against the will of those states. Nobody voted for any of these things.
Well, unfortunately, Tucker, the way our Constitution works is we have one president at a time.
I know.
And executive actions can be easily undone by an incoming president. It's not like you're passing a law that then has to be overturned or overcome by another Congress. I think what's going on here, frankly, we have in this country a system of laws for getting regulations in place. Right. Forgive me for going all law professor on you, but I think it's really important. We have something called the Administrative Procedures Act, which is how regulations are supposed to be formulated. You put something out for public comment, the public gets to comment, the agency then puts out a regulation. Lawsuits happen after that. Somebody says, well, you didn't give me enough notice, you didn't give me enough, and that's really what's going on.
Well, I'm sorry to get a law professor on you as a history major, but actually the president doesn't pass laws, and neither do the courts.
These are regulations.
The Congress
I said the
does.
regulations.
You said laws correctly, because in fact they are laws.
No,
they are laws.
Implementation of laws. The executive implements
where we are now, and you know it
statutes.
as well as I, is the executive branch is making the laws, and they're calling them legislation. They're ignoring Congress, which is another way of saying they're ignoring voters,
Tucker,
and they're doing what they want.
They're acting under statutory authority. They can't go beyond statutory authority. They can get sued for that, and they have, and they've won or lost. In this case, it's the president acting in his power as the executive to implement the laws.
He can do it, and I can do a lot of things, but I choose not to because I restrain myself, because they're bad for me or the people around me. And shouldn't the president, in the interest of democracy, pull back a little bit, look at voters and say, what were you trying to say? Clearly you didn't love Obamacare. Clearly you didn't love my climate policy, because if you did, you would have elected my successor, Hillary Clinton.
So if under that logic, the Republicans should have held those hearings on Merrick Garland, the Supreme Court justice, they should have brought up for a vote, but they didn't. So why don't you give that message to
Because
Mitch McConnell?
I think that's a fair point. I mean, I think it's a fair point. Maybe they should have done that, but I'm talking about
Maybe they
right
should
now.
have.
But they didn't. I'm
They
not here to
didn't, and
defend
Barack
them.
Obama is saying, you know what, I'm still president. This is my
I'm gonna
authority
do
under the law.
whatever I feel
Whatever
like.
under the law I am authorized to do.
Okay, but look, the president's...
what's wrong with it?
What's wrong with it is it's increasing a trend that has been going on for the last 20 years where the country is becoming less democratic. Ordinary people have less control over what happens to them from government than they've ever had before, because more decisions are being made by fewer people, unelected people in the agencies, the courts. It's not good, and you know it's not good, and he's making it worse.
I would say this, Tucker. The people who voted for Barack Obama in overwhelming numbers, got a president for 4 years. And they got a new president in Donald Trump for the next 4 years, who can just as easily, under his executive authority, undo whatever he wants.
I know. And you're
undo
right.
Whatever he wants.
And you're absolutely right.
We only have one president at a time. Now, I will say this.
But we have a Congress that's supposed to be doing this. And basically what Obama's doing is by acting in an authoritarian way, he's guaranteeing that Trump will do the same.
You are misstating the law, Tucker. Congress makes the laws, the president enforces them. These are regulations under statutory authority. If Congress wanted to undo them, Tucker, you know very well they could pass a law to undo them.
And
they don't.
And because they're cowards.
Okay,
but basically, that's true. No.
We can agree on that. Let's agree on that. They're cowards.
On that, David, thank you. Good to see you.
You too.
Now it's time for Twitter Storm, our nightly forecast of social media's most powerful weather patterns. Tonight, Mariah Carey, she's a singer, and she's getting attention on Twitter thanks to her poor lip syncing on New Year's Eve. It turns out she wasn't actually singing the song. We know that because she was caught on tape, apparently unable to hear the soundtrack. The whole embarrassing thing is everywhere. It was televised live on national TV. Twitter had a lot to say about it. Gino said this: the last death of 2016, Mariah Carey's career. Ouch. Tony Lindsay wrote, word is Russian intelligence hacked Mariah Carey's New Year's Eve performance, which is totally plausible, of course, that darn Putin. Jimmy Trina said this: even Milli Vanilli is embarrassed by Mariah Carey's debacle. Brent said Mariah Carey made more money mumbling and being confused on stage for 3 minutes than I will make in my lifetime, which is probably literally true. I want that job. Clara Benin wrote, maybe Mariah Carey didn't give the performance that 2016 wanted, but she gave the performance that 2016 deserved. Pithy as always. That's tonight's Twitter Storm. Up next, how will our relationship with Russia evolve, change, improve? Who knows what's going to happen under President Trump? Ambassador John Bolton's been thinking a lot about it. His ideas on that next. Also, where's evidence of a Russian hack? We all agree it happened, right? So where's the proof? That's coming up. So I bet a year ago you didn't think a whole lot about what Russia was up to, and all of a sudden it's on the front page of every paper every day. U.S.-Russia relations, now considered one of the most important issues in this country. Certainly, when Trump becomes president later this month, they will be center stage on his plate. Former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Ambassador John Bolton, has been thinking an awful lot about this, our relationship with Moscow. He says it may change, it may have to change. He joins us now in studio. Ambassador, great to see you.
Glad to be with you.
So you're skeptical that these sanctions are enough, the ones that President Obama has just imposed on Russia. And your recommendation is, I think I'm quoting you correctly, we need to make the Russians feel pain. What would be the point of that?
The point of that is to get to the place we want to be where this kind of interference and hacking that the Chinese, and others have been engaged in isn't normal activity. And to do that, you need structures of deterrence that tell these foreign intelligence services or their militaries that if you try and do this, it's going to cause you more trouble than you're going to get benefit from it. Because otherwise, we face the prospect that this is going to continue, it's going to expand, and that's trouble for us. We're not ready for it. We don't have adequate defenses. We don't have adequate offenses at the moment.
So the North Koreans have been under, in effect, sanctions for 50 years, okay? And they're one of the poorest countries on the planet.
I'm not talking about economic sanctions.
No, but what's so interesting, though, is any kind of sanction. I mean, they have basically no contact with anybody but China, and yet they hack. They flooded the world with methamphetamine with counterfeit $100 bills. I mean, they caused a lot of mischief, even though they're a pariah. So why would it work with Russia?
Well, because the theory is that they need to understand that we're simply not going to sit back and allow this to happen. And unfortunately, their experience over the past years is precisely that is what will happen. We don't see either evidence or commentary from the administration on what they've done in response not only to earlier examples of Russian hacking, but, for example, China stealing what are estimated to be tens of millions of personnel records from the U.S. government. Indeed, what was leaked out of the administration was a long list of reasons why they can't make up their mind what to do. And I think when you fit what happens in cyberspace with the overall Obama worldview and foreign policy, it's an approach that very much limits the assertion of American interest and constantly ties us down in ways that others take advantage of. So I don't see cyber as being different from a range of other international threats that we faced inadequately for 8 years.
But I mean, are we sure? I mean, we know that the Russians have hacked into all kinds of systems, including the White House computer system a couple of years ago. But are we absolutely positive that they were working to throw this election for Trump? Why would they do that? Trump has promised to make America more assertive, to rebuild our military. These are not goals the Russians share. Why would they want him to be president?
I said during the election, I thought, if anything, if the Russians wanted either of the two candidates to be elected, they'd much rather have Hillary Clinton, because it's more likely that she would carry forward Obama's policies, which are much to their
satisfaction. So this storyline makes no sense.
Well, unless part of the effort is to diminish overall trust and confidence in American institutions on the part of the American people, which this debate we've had for the past 3 months here, I think, has gone a long way to doing. A lot of people think that Trump won because the Russians changed the vote, which there's no evidence of.
I mean, isn't Paul Krugman doing that single-handedly without Putin's help?
He would qualify as a useful idiot in the Leninist version of this. But I think it's very important here. Let's face it, neither you nor I nor anybody watching this program that doesn't have the appropriate classification access really knows what the facts are. That's why. But so talk's cheap. That's why this meeting between the president-elect and the intelligence community, I think it's supposed to be this week, where they go over the data, is going to be so important. I haven't seen it. I have talked to senators who have seen it. They think it's pretty clear Russia was involved. Let's see what the president-elect says.
Yeah, I'm skeptical, but open-minded. Thanks a lot, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Up next, newspaper editorial says Trump is wrong to shrug off Russia's cyber attacks that undermined American democracy itself. But wait. Be sure that actually happened, and if so, how do we know? An editor from that paper is here next. Well, President-elect Trump famously skeptical over the idea the Russians meddled in our presidential election. Well, some are not buying his denial. We've yet to see any actual proof that they did. In fact, just moments ago, our friend and colleague Sean Hannity interviewed Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks. The interview airs tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern on this channel. But here's what he told Sean about the source of those Clinton emails. Watch.
Can you say to the American people unequivocally that you did not get this information about the DNC, John Podesta's emails? Can you tell the American people 1,000% you did not get it from Russia or anybody associated with Russia?
We can say, we have said repeatedly over the last 2 months that our source is not the Russian government. And it is not a state party.
Interesting. There's a lot more news than interview. It's going to air tomorrow at 10 o'clock on Hannity. You heard it right there. WikiLeaks says Russia is not behind all of this. Some are not buying that. The Philadelphia Inquirer editorial board even asked, whose side is Trump on? Here now is Paul Davies. He's deputy editorial page editor of that paper. And so, Paul, thanks a lot for joining us today. So you all wrote this pretty florid editorial today excoriating Trump for not taking this seriously. This was an attack on our democracy, on a free and fair election. How do you know exactly that Russia was behind this?
Well, the President Obama has announced it, and the intelligence communities have said that was their assessment.
But they haven't offered any actual proof of it, and most of the accounts we've received about how they know this have been anonymously sourced. So, I mean, as a journalist, are you comfortable taking at face value the assurances of anonymous government officials about something that's important?
Well, it's not just the president and the intelligence community. I mean, Senator McCain, Senator McConnell, they've also come out. They've seemed to have heard the briefings. I obviously haven't heard the briefings. I don't think the president would be taking actions or issuing sanctions against Russia or kicking Russians out of the country if he wasn't pretty sure about the evidence.
Okay, so you just have faith that the president would not have a political motivation to do this, that nobody involved would have any other motive, that they all must be telling the truth? Is that what you're saying?
The president, they talked about this back in September. It's not before the election. Before the election, there was even talk about the Russians being involved in the hacking.
Right. So, I mean, they were mad, of course, because emails from the DNC were leaked to WikiLeaks somehow, and then emails from John Podesta's personal Gmail account were leaked, and some of those details were embarrassing. And I think it's on the basis of that people are saying this election was hacked. So which of those facts that fell into the public view do you think Americans shouldn't have known before they voted in November?
I mean, the troubling point and the point of the editorial was that if there's hacking going on and it's interfering with our elections, and another country is doing that, that's a problem. That's a problem. It undermines our democracy. And the point is, if President-elect Trump is just sort of shrugging it off and telling everybody to move on, and it's not a big issue, that is the troubling aspect. And the point is, we should have the hearings, and we should get to the bottom of what happened.
Yeah.
And as much that can be disclosed should be disclosed.
I agree with you on pretty much everything you just said.
The fact that the intelligence communities have said this, the intelligence communities have released this information, and I don't think they just go out and just release stuff and provoke a country just over politics. That strikes me as very
that's never happened before. I mean, come on. But let me just ask you this. You said everything. I mean, I agree with you. I want to know more. We all do. But you said this affected our election, and I'm not exactly sure how. Are you suggesting that the voting machines themselves were rigged, or are you referring to those emails? And if you are referring to the emails, are you saying that we shouldn't have seen those before we voted?
If it influenced the election and caused people to vote one way or the other, that's the impact of what happened. That they're trying to get in and set the election.
How did that influence people to vote? How did that happen? I mean, you're making this allegation. Explain how it happened.
If people think that because after they read those emails that somehow they're influenced to vote one way or the other, then it influences their vote. I mean, I don't have a document that says 10% of the people voted for Trump or voted against Clinton because of that.
Right. No, it's speculation. But so you're saying that you wish those emails as a journalist.
The point.
No, but hold on. This is an important point. This is the point. Are you saying you wish those emails had not gone into the public sphere, that we hadn't seen those emails, that we'd had less information when we voted? Is that what you're saying?
That has nothing. That's not what we said at all in the editorial. I mean,
what are you saying?
I'm all for having information out there to find out. The public should be fully informed, and they go to.
So why are you upset about what happened during the election? We got more information.
What I'm upset about is that What I'm upset about is that President-elect Trump, it just seems to be blowing the whole thing off and telling everybody to move on.
Well, wait a second.
Relationships and connections to Russia and his friendship with the appointment to the Secretary of State and other friends that he's appointed, and his ties and his positive assessment for Putin is what's troubling. That's the part.
I get that you don't like Putin and you don't like Trump, but you said, and I'm reading your editorial right here, you said, instead of standing up for the bedrock of U.S. democracy, free and fair elections, and then you said Trump has a cavalier attitude regarding Russia's efforts to undermine American democracy. And I just want to get right to the nub of what you are saying. How exactly, specifically, did they prevent that from being a free and fair election? How did they undermine our democracy? By telling us things that you think we shouldn't have known?
Yeah, if they're hacking into the computer systems and releasing information that influences our elections, that's troubling.
Okay, so let me ask you the last question. If you could go back and undo that, would you do so? Would you make it so American voters didn't know the information they got from the WikiLeaks emails?
I don't think a foreign country should be meddling in our
You're not answering my question.
I mean, regardless of what information is hacking what, that is the point. That is the main point.
Do you think it was a good thing or a bad thing that we knew that information before we voted?
I mean, it depends on where you're coming from. If you want to know that information.
How about as a voter?
I don't know.
As a voter, is it better or worse to have that information?
Having all your information is what you want from a voter, but having it hacked by a foreign government is not what you want.
So you like the ends but not the means?
I don't want a foreign country hacking into any information in our elections and the president-elect just blowing it off like it's not a big deal.
All right. I'm still having trouble understanding your argument, but thank you for the game attempt. I appreciate it. Paul.
Okay.
See ya. Well, will we ever be able to see anything from the Russia investigation, or would all remain classified? Fox News chief intelligence correspondent Catherine Herridge is here with the answer. Catherine, great to see you.
Well, thank you, Tucker. So we had this report last week from Homeland Security and FBI, which was really kind of thin in terms of the data that it included about Russia, but it did identify 2 computer viruses, sort of phishing schemes to get information. Now, that is not a direct link to Russia, but these are viruses, if you will, that are often used by the Russian intelligence services.
Okay.
My information is that there's a lot more intelligence beyond what was released last week. And the question for the intelligence community is how much of that will be declassified in order to make their case more publicly that there is this link, that it was directed by the Russian government. Now, to answer your first question in sort of a roundabout way, the president has asked for a more extensive report, and our expectation is that a version of that will be declassified sometime before the 20th. So what to watch for there is whether there really is evidence of intent and motivation by the hackers, because that's the kind of intelligence that requires a human source or what's called an electronic intercept, like picking up a phone call. So this is a very high threshold of information to have, number one. And number two, it would be highly unusual for the U.S. government to declassify that kind of information.
And why would they do so in this case?
If you wanted to make the case that there really is that solid link to the Russian government and that it was directed by those around Putin and Putin himself, you would have to have very high quality intelligence.
Yes.
And that's not always the intelligence that belongs to us. It can belong to our foreign partners, so it's
Right.
not really ours to disclose. And the Russians play a game, and we've seen it in the past, where they may deny being responsible for something, and they do it in an effort to force our hand to release information to satisfy the American people or others, our allies
Right.
in general, right? But when that happens, you burn the source and you burn the method, and that's really to Russia's advantage. So it's a real balancing act. But again, the thing to watch is intent and motivation, because that is the kind of intelligence that requires a human source or picking up a phone call, and that's very hard to get. And you also have to be very reluctant to burn that source for the future.
This is why the Russians are such good chess players.
Yes.
I think. Exactly. Catherine Herridge,
You're
great to
welcome.
see you,
Yeah,
as
thank you.
always. Well, some teachers around the country have abused students in some pretty appalling ways, but then go on to new classrooms in new cities, and no one is the wiser. How big is the problem? A big problem, it turns out. An investigative reporter who just spent a year looking into this joins us next with details. Stay tuned.
Wouldn't it be great to win $5,000 a week for life? But wouldn't it be even better if those checks kept on coming even after you're not around? It's the Publishers Clearinghouse $5,000 a week forever prize. Win and you get $5,000 a week for your life. Then after that, someone you choose gets $5,000 a week for their life.
Well, it's one of those stories that's hard to believe is real, but it is. Across the country, teachers who've been kicked out of their classrooms, often for sexual abuse of students, are finding their ways back into other classrooms in other schools. USA Today just released the findings of a year-long investigation, an amazing series, into education officials putting kids in harm's way by making it easier for abusive teachers to find new jobs. Here now is USA Today investigative reporter Stephen Riley, who wrote it. I have to say, rare a newspaper series just rivets the reader. This is an amazing series that you did. I just want to throw up a couple of examples that you found. The first is a high school football coach from Orangefield, Texas, called Kip McFarland. Tell us about him.
Well, thanks for having me. The issue that we looked at is instances where teachers were disciplined for misconduct, lost their jobs in one school district. And what those school districts did often was secretly pass them along and kept the allegations of misconduct and what specifically happened secret, and allowed those teachers to move on to other public school systems or private school systems and obtain other jobs. And in this case of Kip McFarland in Texas, the football coach, this first school district investigated, found more than a half dozen instances where he made inappropriate comments to female high school students, and negotiated, in the correspondence we looked at, negotiated a graceful exit for this teacher from the school district.
Here's the school district attorney, Karen Johnson, in 2005 to the superintendent, quote, "This incident does not have to end McFarland's career." Unfortunately, it didn't end his career.
Exactly.
And he went on to what?
He went on to a neighboring school district where those statements that were inappropriate turned into physical conduct that was inappropriate. He's engaged in sexual misconduct with a student and is currently incarcerated.
That's unbelievable.
And that second school district had really no way of knowing what happened in the first school district because the misconduct wasn't reported to state authorities.
But this, what I find so amazing, okay, that's one part. But you had a couple of instances where the new employer called the old school and asked specifically, is there anything I should know about this guy? And the teacher, the abuser, was given a clean review by the previous school that knew better. Why would they lie on behalf of abusers?
In some cases that we looked at, they're all contractually obligated to give a neutral or positive recommendation to this teacher. It's the shorthand for it is passing the trash. The school district will sign a confidential settlement agreement to get rid of the teacher as expeditiously as possible. So in exchange for the teacher leaving the school district will agree not to tell prospective future employers what actually happened and what ended that teacher's employment at the school district.
This is unbelievable. So there's a guy in New Jersey in the Montville Township Public Schools, Jason Fennis. He signed a contract stating that only his positions and dates of employment would be given to future employers. And then he went on to a private school, and what happened?
He abused children at that private school, and he also recently pled guilty to molesting children once he arrived at that private school. So the public school had knowledge of misbehavior. They didn't want that teacher around their students anymore, but they just simply made him another school system's problem.
I assume he was being protected by the union in this case.
That plays a part in it. It's incredibly expensive and difficult to go through the proper channels in some cases to get rid of a problem teacher. And that's often why we see some of these agreements.
That's just unbelievable. This is really a great series. I cannot recommend it more highly. It lives on the web forever. And if you're watching this, you should read it in case you're in a good mood and want to change that. Stephen Riley, great piece.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Well, does your boss make you stay on top of work emails from home? In France, there's a new law that you may want to show your boss tomorrow morning. It may work only in France, though. Plus, Ed Henry joins us in the friend zone. You saw him all last week. He's back.
This program is brought to you by Team I Love from Shire. It's time to show your eyes some I Love.
My friends